Good evening, everyone. My name is David McLennan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the City of Vincent. Welcome to the Council briefing session this evening. Mayor Cole is on an approved leave of absence and Deputy Mayor Susan Gonczewski is unwell this evening. So Council will be appointing an alternate presiding member for the briefing session this evening. Understand Councillor Hallett has nominated to perform that role. If there were no objections or issues, then I would invite Councillor Hallett to the podium to commence and preside for the meeting this evening, and starting with an acknowledgement of country.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the council briefing of the 11th of October. I'd first like to acknowledge that we're on Whadjuk land in the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. First, we've got some apologies. As the CEO has mentioned, the Mayor, Emma Cole, is on approved leave of absence, as is Councillor Ross Iopolo. And Deputy Mayor Councillor Susan Gonczewski is an apology for this meeting. And I believe we have Councillor Ron Alexander and Dan Loden on Zoom. And if it's possible to get them up on that screen.
Through you, Chair, Councillor Alexander was attempting to participate electronically. Oh, he is there. Okay. Wendy, could we just get the screen up in front of council so we can see all those participating? Thanks.
All right, welcome councillors. First up, we've got public question time and receiving of public statements. There's no set order, although we possibly don't have anyone that's not doing a deputation. So there's no set order, just come up to the microphone and state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and the item you are speaking on this evening. As this is a briefing session, statements and questions are limited to items that appear on the meeting agenda. Everyone gets up to 3 minutes to speak, and the CEO will have his timer on. So if you hear the buzzer go off, we just ask that you finish up your statement as soon as you can. Can I just have a show of hands if anyone's doing, if you're not doing a deputation? Okay, so we'll come back to that. No one else? All right. I believe we've got one question on notice from the public via email from Kingsley Sullivan, which will appear in next week's agenda, and we'll then get a response in writing. We then go to deputations. First up, we've got Lewis, apologies for the pronunciation, Sugar and Stephen Dungy of Perth in relation to item 5.5. I do just want to flag, I guess, for all of you though, that as you can see, we're a little bit light in council tonight. So there's 3 councillors not here. You would be welcome to come back next week, but I suspect given that you're here, you'd like to continue on the record here.
Is this always on? Yep. Okay. Good evening. My name is Lewis Sugar. I am an associate with Element, and I'll be speaking to item 5.5 on the agenda tonight, being Local Planning Scheme Amendment number 11 to the city's Local Planning Scheme number 2. And that relates to the emergency helicopter flight pass associated with Royal Perth Hospital. Joining me tonight is the State Director of Trauma, Stephen Dungy, as well. And at the end of our presentation, we'd welcome any questions from you. I'd like to thank the City of Vincent for its ongoing support and assistance provided on this project over the past few years. Following the approval and construction of an upgraded helipad at RPH in the City of Perth, Element have been working closely with East Metro Health Service, the City of Perth, the City of Vincent, and a number of other key stakeholders in preparing and submitting this scheme amendment request to ensure it achieves the most beneficial outcome for the hospital and landowners within both local government areas. The flight paths proposed to be protected through this scheme amendment have been carefully considered, with alignment specifically looking to ensuring all relevant aviation safety requirements are met, limiting the impact to land holdings by taking advantage of major road and rail reservations, and utilising the Swan River for a large proportion of the flight path area, considering the existing planning framework to limit the impact on development potential and to limit the impact on areas of land that are of strategic importance to the state, the City of Vincent, Perth, and Development WA. Now, without protecting the emergency helicopter flight paths, ongoing development in proximity to RPH is very likely to impact the safety of operations into the future, especially where a helicopter is required to fly with one engine inoperable. This may ultimately lead to the recently upgraded helipad at RPH being decommissioned, which in turn then impacts on the ability to treat patients that are in need of critical care at the State Medical Trauma Unit located at RPH. Stephen Dungy will now touch on the importance of the State Medical Trauma Unit and the importance of protecting the flight paths. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you today. I'm a professor of emergency medicine and the current state director of the WA Trauma Service. In the 1970s, a trauma surgeon called R. Adams Crowley, who is based in Baltimore, Maryland, recognised that some patients who survived major traumatic injury and made it alive to hospital had limited time to have their injuries diagnosed and treated once they got there. For some of them, the failure to fully utilise what he called the golden hour ultimately led to their death. In trauma medicine, minutes can literally mean the difference between living and dying. The other big innovation of that era came about from the recognition that not all hospitals were equipped to provide the best care for the critically unwell trauma patient, and that there needed to be suitably resourced hospitals that made these patients core business. Such hospitals needed to be able to provide specialist trauma surgeons 24/7, with access to operating theatres, blood bank, laboratories, and supported by suitably trained specialists in emergency medicine, anaesthetics, radiology, and intensive care. They also needed to have rehabilitation services and clinics of the highest order. In this state, the State Trauma Unit is based at the Royal Perth. Like virtually every trauma unit in the world, the city centre location makes sense because that's the way traffic flows. Other hospitals still see major trauma cases, but most cases flow to RPH, with hospitals like Fiona Stanley or Charles Gardner seeing about 60 to 70 major trauma cases a year, and the RPH seeing 11 to 1,200 major trauma cases. It is the second busiest trauma unit in Australia and provides world-class care with world-class outcomes. Hundreds of our patients arrive by chopper, and the majority of these are classified as being major trauma. Please excuse me. Some are so ill that they arrive with CPR in progress and are taken straight to the operating theatre to give them their best chance of survival. The new helipad at Royal Perth has recently been opened and has been developed at a cost of millions of dollars to enable a new generation of choppers to land, and they are bigger, faster, with more capacity and greater range to better service the population of WA. Establishing and maintaining the fastest service possible for trauma patients is something common to all trauma units everywhere around the world and not unique to WA. For some patients, it will mean the difference between life and death, and for many of the rest, it will mean more rapid diagnosis and better outcomes. And the helicopter service is core to our business of saving lives. Thank you.
Thank you both, Lewis and Stephen. We don't have questions at this point, so thank you. And now I'll call up Connor Porter-Wilkinson.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me present today. My name is Connor Porter-Wilkinson from Element, and I will be providing a brief overview in support of agenda item 5.2. This relates to a change of use and amendments to the approved number of workstation bays at 496 Charles Street, North Perth. It's location of the Eco Spray Car Wash. The application supports changes that are being made to the existing operations to ensure the business can operate successfully, whilst addressing previous concerns raised by the neighbouring properties in respect to amenity considerations. I'd like to thank the city's officers for working on us with this application and ultimately for their favourable recommendation for approval. Through our work with the officers, it has been demonstrated that the application is supported by technical reporting and noise and operational management plan, which is a condition as part of the recommended approval for ongoing compliance. For this recommendation, we are happy with the proposed conditions. However, we do believe the conditions relating to the no vacancy sign should be removed. These conditions are numbers 6.1.1 and 6.1.2. In our opinion of the two conditions is that the requirement for a no vacancy sign is unnecessary for the proposed development for the following reasons. Firstly, it is very clear if the site could accommodate a customer approaching from Charles Street due to the open nature of the development's frontage, not restricting passing motorists' sightlines, and as such, a no vacancy sign would not help in this instance. And secondly, a no vacancy sign on the site would not be the most visible thing to passing motorists unless it was to be of a significant size or illuminated to attract attention. This is not considered to be an optimal outcome for the site, especially due to the fact that the openness of the site already provides enough of a visual cue to passing motorists on the availability for an additional customer to be serviced. Once again, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any further questions you may have on the item. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't do questions to you folks, but I did just want to say in terms of thank you for coming along. Next week, obviously, is the meeting where we do the actual decision making. Tonight's just for asking questions. Because there was a few councillors not here, you're welcome to send through any written comments during the week that you want to put forward to everyone. You're welcome to come back next week, but it would be best not to repeat, I guess, what you've got. But I think if we ask questions to administration tonight that trigger some more thoughts for you, you're welcome to bring new information for next week as well.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. I will now move to item 4, declarations of interest.
Through you, Chair, no declarations of interest were received for this evening's meeting. I would just like to mention for the record that in relation to the item just subject to the deputation, the item 5.5 on the helicopter flight path scheme amendment, I was involved in the initial discussions on this process that Royal Perth has gone through in my former role at the Department of Planning. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Because we've got people in the public gallery, we might go to these items first. So we'll start with 5.5, Local Planning Scheme Amendment number 11. Councillors, do you have any questions of administration? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about the noise impacts. Has that been modelled at all? Is it a consideration when determining this application?
Through the Chair, the flight path currently exists, and this scheme amendment wouldn't change the fact that the flight path exists. So noise hasn't been considered as part of the proposal because it's not changing whether or not the flight path occurs. So we wouldn't consider it to be a relevant consideration.
My understanding was some of these changes are due to the fact that they're using a new and larger type of helicopter. So, you know, while the path may exist, I'd expect that a larger helicopter has a larger noise impact. Are we maybe able to just get some information from the proponent about any changes that they foresee in noise? From reading Element's report, I think it is a valid consideration.
Yes, through the Chair, I understand that those helicopters are already being used. So, yeah, in short, this will protect the flight path into the future, but it's not required for the flight path to currently occur, if you like. So it's already occurring because there are no buildings in the way at the moment. It's just ensuring that buildings and the construction of buildings don't impede on the existing flight path in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Just a minor question around a comment in the report. There's a notification that development applications would ordinarily be required for works at this height. This is on page 3 of the report, though some ancillary structures that would currently be exempt would be required to gain development approval as a result of the amendment. Just wondering if you could give an example of the types of ancillary structures that would apply to.
Yeah, sure. So if a development approval is granted for, say, a 5-story building, and then subsequently through the building permit and the building design process after the development application's approved, additional air conditioning units or a lift overrun or maybe antenna or those kinds of things, telco infrastructure was proposed to be added to the top of the building, then ordinarily those things are minor and wouldn't require a planning approval. There's a mechanism in the regulations that allows those structures to be exempt and continue through the process without needing an amendment to the DA. Under this proposal, all of those things would require approval to ensure that if they go above that height limit, if you like, or into that area that the scheme amendment requires. So there would be an additional requirement for planning approval for those kinds of structures which wouldn't exist without that scheme amendment.
Okay, so there's potentially increased cost and requirements for applicants in that case, although I suppose that can be addressed through upfront communication. Should this be approved, that for future applications that might be affected by this, that could be flagged early on? Because I imagine that if that is bundled into the one application, there's no extra requirements.
Yes, through the chair, that's correct. If it was bundled into the one application, it wouldn't obviously wouldn't require subsequent development applications. There's no doubt that it will be more complicated though, because usually these issues arise when the building drawings are developed. They're typically not developed until after the planning approval is issued, because there's not enough certainty to put the funding into developing the building plans up. So obviously we would flag this up early. I think that would be essential so that applicants had the opportunity to address those issues early, and they would be aware from the start that there was the potential for further development applications. But it would only be if they went into that zone, if you like, or if the building was already at that limit.
Okay, so if there were ancillary structures that didn't go into that height zone, they would still be exempt. It would only be above that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Anyone else? Last call. All right, thank you. We'll move on from 5.5 and we'll jump back to 5.2, number 496 Charles Street, North Perth, change of use to unlisted use car wash and detailing amendment to approve number of working station bays. Councillors? Councillor Wallace?
Thank you, Chair. There were some comments tonight about the no vacancy sign and the appropriateness of that. Could admin just give a response regarding the rationale around that?
Yes, certainly. Through the chair, the rationale for this proposed condition is that neighbours have raised concern that cars are being parked off-site when the site's full of vehicles being washed. And so it was an attempt at trying to address that issue in combination with the applicant's changes which they've made, which will certainly free up more bays and spaces on site for them to park vehicles. So an attempt to address that issue and to ensure that when people are driving past and all the bays are full, they're not coming onto the site, which will potentially push one of the other vehicles they have on the site, which they might have brought in themselves, might potentially push them to park that vehicle somewhere else. So we're trying to minimise the risk of vehicles being parked on other sites. So that was the rationale for it. We thought it was a reasonable condition. This is the first time we've heard that the applicant had a concern with it. So we're happy to go away and have more of a discussion to see whether it would work or not and provide some more information in the briefing notes.
Okay, thanks. I guess it was raised as well may potentially be great to have those conversations. It was raised as well that it may potentially be ineffective. So I was wondering also if the condition were to be included, would it require further guidelines around size and position on the lot?
Yes, through the chair. I think that's right. I think we need to have further discussion about how it would work. If the applicant is raising those concerns, we'll certainly need to make sure that it's visible and effective. It's the whole purpose of it is so that when people drive past and there's nowhere for them to, there's no capacity for the site to take them, they don't pull into the site. So if they can't see it or it's not delivering that outcome, then it wouldn't be an appropriate condition. So we'll have a look at all of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from that, forgive me if I missed it in the report. I'm not sure I quite understand what the issue is with extra cars. Are we talking about cars that belong to customers who are waiting to have their car washed? And could you just explain why that's an issue that they're parked elsewhere? Because how is that different to cars being parked on the street anywhere else?
Yeah, through the chair, it's not the customers that are waiting to be serviced that are the issue. It's the applicant the operator of the business, they bring in vehicles from car yards and other places to have washed. So the claim being made by the community is that they might bring in 10 vehicles or 5 vehicles or whatever the number is, I'm not sure, and they park those vehicles elsewhere. As part of their commercial operation, they're parking car yard vehicles elsewhere and they line them up and get them cleaned one by one and then go and park them on other sites or on the road, and that is impeding the community's ability to park in public bays, and they're using other sites to park vehicles when they shouldn't. The concern is that it's a car yard, it's taking up public parking bays, which is putting pressure on their streets. So the proposal is to ensure that there are conditions around that issue, but we're also trying to ensure that when that's occurring, they've got car yard vehicles in the site and they've filled all their bays up, that they're not also adding pressure by having private people coming onto the site, which might encourage them to move one of the car yard vehicles to another private property or onto the street. So it was an attempt to try and address the issues that were raised by the submissions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What parking requirements would this type of application normally have, if any, to be provided on site?
Through you, Mayor Cole, through the chair, it would relate to the use. I'll have to check to see what the number of bays required under the policy is. But it was previously approved. So yeah, I'll have to dig that out and put it in and include it in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I'd appreciate some thought on this in the coming week, as I can understand what the issue is. It does seem like a slightly inelegant way to deal with it, but would be happy for more advice in the briefing notes and perhaps some conversation with the applicant during the week.
Thank you, councillors. All right, that's all for your item as well. So we'll go back to the start with 5.1, which is number 11 Douglas Street, West Perth, proposed change of use to unlisted use, dog daycare amendment to approved. No questions? I just had a question in relation to the public consultation generated one person who essentially made a complaint around the operations. Have we received other complaints outside of the consultation process?
Through the chair, no. During the consultation of the DA, we only received the one submission that you referred to. And since the use has been operating since September 2019, the city hasn't received any other complaints.
Great, thank you. In that case, we'll move to the next item, 5.3. Outcomes of advertising. Early evening for you. Outcomes of advertising amendment 9 to local planning scheme number 2, portion of number 251 Scarborough Beach Road, Mount Hawthorn. No questions? All right. 5.4, outcomes of advertising omnibus amendment number 10 to local planning scheme number 2. All right. 5.6, outcomes of advertising and adoption of amended development compliance enforcement policy. All right, 5.7, redevelopment proposals, the Avenue and Frame Court car parks, Leaderville. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to flag I have questions on the confidential attachment and said we could bring that up at the end of the meeting if that was possible.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you, Councillor Loden. Anyone else on anything that's non-confidential? All right, so we'll come back to that one at the end. 5.8, Mount Hawthorn Youth Skate Space. Councillor Castle.
Thank you. I just have a short question around the budget for this item. I noticed in the replacement, we have mentioned that the budget is limited to the election commitment of $200,000. And my recollection was that there was some small budget for landscaping or other ancillary works that might be required. And I just wanted to check what provision have we made for any further works that might be outside of the actual skate space in our budget?
Through you, Councillor Hallett. Yes, we have included $30,000, which is included in the report under the budget section. That is an operational cost and will be utilised for the consultant for the design and any of the community consultation. The note in the report that you're referring to in red is just referring to that the design and the actual skate park infrastructure has been designed to match that 200,000 election commitment funding.
Thank you. And in regard to that design, was that a competitive process, or were we in this instance able to go straight to the provider to prepare that?
Through you, Councillor Hallett, that was a competitive process.
Nothing further, Councillor Castle? Anyone else? All right, thank you. Next item is 5.9, appointment of community representatives to Arts Advisory Group. Any questions? .10, Place Plan Annual Review. Councillor Wallace.
I had a very quick question, Chad. The Beaufort Street streetscape plan, would I be able to get a copy of that? Just out of interest.
Through you, Councillor Hallett, absolutely, I'll send that through.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you for being so obliging. 5.11, Public Health Plan 2020 to 2025 Annual Review 2. I only have comments, so we'll move to past 6, Infrastructure and Environment with new items, to Community and Business Services. Thank you to the Strategy and Development staff. 7.1, Financial Statements as at 31st of August 2022. Authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st of August to 31st of August 22. 7.3, Investment Report as at 31st of August. Nothing, Councillor Loden? And item 8.1, Council Briefing and Ordinary Meeting of Council Dates for 2023. Surely there's questions about that. All right. 8.2, Outcome of Advertising and Adoption of Amended Council Member Contact with Developers Policy. Councillor Wallace.
I did have a question about this one. I know this is very late in this process to be raising this. The new requirement to report prior to a DA lodgement seems like quite onerous. I guess particularly, I don't know, it could include every contact with a developer about anything that's happening in Vincent. I don't know, does admin have a view on whether that is a reasonable amount of data to be collecting? it's not something that I do a lot, but just in the absence of a DA, does seem particularly onerous.
Through the chair, I think the intention of council in collecting that information was to try and ensure that we had a more transparent process for conversations that people were having. And I think by implementing some controls, it prompts you to think about what kind of conversation you've had with the person, use your discretion. Is that something that was informing a potential development outcome? Or is it just a general conversation about, I'm looking to start my business in Vincent, you know, what do I do? Where do I go from there? And then it's up to each individual member to contemplate policy requirements and consider if that would need to be reported. But it doesn't need to be the minutiae of every interaction that you've had.
And to add to that, Chair, it's essentially trying to capture the pre-lodgement process, which is now quite extended since we've instituted quite rigorous design review process. So an applicant might go through 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we've gone through 5, 6. Well, so what's the maximum number of the design review? So up to 6 different meetings of design review panel, which could be 2 years prior to actual lodgement of the DA. So during that time where a proposal might be being formed, we wanted to be able to have a mechanism where councillors could declare that interaction. But we would normally try to facilitate that through a whole of council meeting where the planning staff would attend and would host that here formally. So if and when a council was approached, the general recommendation would be to refer that back through myself or the director or the planning manager, where we could facilitate a discussion with all council members being invited with the proponent while they're in that design review pre-lodgement stage.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Oops, sorry, I'll try and process the question. I can see value in requiring it for DRP assessments or when other large developments are forthcoming, but like taken as it's written, it says in writing, record every instance of prescribed contact with a developer by noting some details. And then I guess there's just it doesn't seem like there's room in this policy for the discretion that you were kind of talking about previously, which I agree with. So I guess I'll go away and think this week if I could.
Is there a question?
No. Is it not? Do you have any comments on my previous statement?
Through the chair, we have provided some definitions about what developer is and what development is. So that might perhaps cover off some of the concerns. We could also, if you had any suggested wording, make some further changes to the framework, which is basically the guiding document for how we would intend to capture this.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is probably similarly related, and I think I remember raising this when we had a workshop discussion about it, that I'm a little bit concerned that the definitions will be circular and not actually allow scope for reporting of developer contact before the application is lodged, because the definition of a planning or development proposal means and includes what A, B and C, an application under the city's operative town planning scheme. So it doesn't actually become a development proposal until there is an application, which doesn't trigger prescribed contact, which therefore doesn't trigger the reporting requirements. And I understand what we're trying to capture here. And I think particularly in those cases where we have an extended design review panel process and other pre-lodgement consultation, that it is important to record that. I'm just concerned that we might slip through a loophole in the definitions as they're defined here.
Would you like some clarity on?
So I would like that to be considered over the week as to whether we might need to tighten up that wording so it's clear what we are trying to capture and that we're not going to slip through the cracks. But I also would like some advice on a question that I raised when we first talked about this. Is my concern is, how is a council member able to determine whether it is an application? Because we do have these situations where there may be preliminary conversations with developers, not very often, but they can happen, and they may or may not lead to an application. So that exercise of discretion by the councillor to decide when it becomes prescribed contact or not would be great if we could have some guidance on how we can determine that. Thank you. That was my sort of question.
No response required. Councillors, any other questions? All right, next one, very a complex one, information bulletin 8.3. Any questions on that one? Thank you, Councillor Loden.
My usual questions about the DAs. I was just intrigued that we saw a huge, not a huge, but an increase in the number of applications assessed, but also the value of those applications that were assessed as well. I was just interested compared to the previous months. Was it just simply the fact that we had some big ones that we've been working on for a while and those ones were basically approved that month?
Yes, through Councillor Hallett. The number of large applications that we've received has increased. So we're receiving more larger applications, less of the smaller addition single houses, and more of the apartment mixed use development proposals. We had 4 JDAPs approved during that period, I understand. So that's the reason why the value of the developments is higher. And because of the volume, we've been dealing with some of the backlog as well, which those applications obviously take longer, the bigger ones. So that's part of the reason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loden. That brings us to the end of the agenda, apart from going into a confidential session to discuss the outcomes, redevelopment proposals 5.7 Avenue and Frame Court car parks.